Hi everyone. Tonight, we step into a hut that's barely larger than a modern living room, yet far colder than you might want to picture. The year is somewhere in the early 1300s. You're standing on a muddy village track, and outside, a sharp wind cuts straight through the thatch. You push the door open, and at once a wave of damp, smoky air hits your chest. It clings to your clothes, stings your eyes, and fills your nose with a heavy blend of wood smoke, animal waste, and the sour smell of unwashed wool. You blink into the darkness, watching your breath form pale clouds in front of you. You think, honestly, you might not survive a night like this. So before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy this kind of content. And if you'd like to share, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, lower the lights and imagine yourself standing in that doorway, listening to the creak of rafters under the weight of snow. You move carefully across the packed earth floor, your boots crunching on frost that has formed indoors. The hut is dim, lit only by the weak glow of a central hearth where a few logs struggle to burn. Smoke rises slowly, or at least attempts to, before collecting thickly beneath the low roof because the smoke hole above barely draws. You cough. Your eyes burn. For a brief moment, you wonder whether the open air outside might actually be easier to breathe. Yet this, for medieval peasants, was warmth. Archaeologists studying preserved medieval homes in England and Scandinavia have found roof beams blackened with layers of soot, clear evidence that these buildings effectively served as their own chimneys. This was everyday life. If you wanted heat, you accepted smoke. Scholars still debate whether constant exposure to smoke caused more lung disease than it prevented, since it did kill some insects, offering at least a small benefit. You look around and notice the walls, made of woven branches packed with mud. They appear sturdy, but in reality, cold air seeps through every crack. You place your hand against one wall and feel a rigid surface, nearly frozen. A thin draft slides down your sleeve. Medieval building rules, to the extent they existed, didn't include insulation. What people relied on was mud, straw, and faith. Still, there are signs of care. Bundles of herbs hang drying above the hearth, their faint scent barely cutting through the smoke. A roughly carved wooden crucifix rests in one corner. A few cracked pots, repaired with lead, sit on a shelf. You crouch closer to the fire and hold out your hands, but the warmth fades almost as soon as it reaches your skin. It's no surprise families went to bed early. Why remain awake in the cold when lying together helped retain at least some heat? You think about how exposed these nights were. Wolves prowled the edges of villages. Thieves sometimes struck when doors were secured with nothing more than wooden latches. Darkness itself was unsettling. In winter, nights could last 14 hours or more. Imagine being enclosed in a smoke-filled room for that long. Perhaps that's why bedtime became a shared experience. Families sang, told stories, prayed, or simply sat together in silence before sleep. Here's an interesting detail. Manorial court records sometimes mention fines for excessive nighttime noise, suggesting that even peasants complained about loud neighbors through those thin walls. Medieval villages, it seems, could be noisy places, even in the depth of winter. As you sit near the hearth, you notice frost forming on the inside of the thatched roof. From time to time, it melts and drips down like tiny icy needles onto your back. Children run barefoot across the earthen floor, unbothered, their feet toughened by a lifetime close to the ground. They dive beneath a pile of straw where blankets wait, squealing at the cold until shared body heat warms them. You're invited too. A hand gestures from the shadowed corner. You hesitate. You're fond of your modern bed, but curiosity pulls you forward. You shuffle over and look down at the bed. It's little more than a wooden platform pushed against the wall, topped with straw, flattened wool sacks, and patched rags. Yet in this hut, it's the heart of daily life. It's where people slept, ate, talked, cared for the sick, and even gave birth. In winter, it became a sanctuary. You lower yourself onto it and feel the straw crunch beneath you, sharp against your skin. It isn't comfortable, but it is survival. Every groan of timber and whistle of wind reminds you how fragile the boundary between warmth and freezing truly is. Your thoughts drift. How many winters could someone endure like this? Historical records show high death rates during winter, especially among infants and the elderly. And yet, families persisted with remarkable determination. Some historians believe peasants accepted hardship as part of divine will, while others argue they developed coping methods we tend to overlook. The debate continues. But tonight, lying on straw beneath a smoke-darkened roof, you sense hardship and endurance tightly interwoven. Your eyelids grow heavy as the embers fade to a dull orange. Outside, you can hear the low sounds of livestock, kept close for protection. Soon, they'll be even closer, sometimes inside the dwelling itself. That, you realize, is another layer of winter survival. For now, you remain still, listening to the drip of thawing frost, the soft hiss of smoke, and the steady breathing around you. The long winter night has only just begun. You wake in the faint light of dawn and feel something scratching your cheek. It's straw, rough and coarse, pushing through a thin linen sack. You shift, hearing a rustle like dry leaves underfoot. Then you become aware of dozens of tiny movements beneath you. Fleas, lice, mites. Your skin starts to itch before you can stop it. Welcome to a medieval bed. Most peasants didn't own wooden frames or soft mattresses. What they had was a sack filled with straw, sometimes mixed with hay, reeds, or moss when resources were scarce. This was known as a palliaus. Every few months, families replaced the filling, because over time it became compacted, damp, and full of insects. Imagine lying down each night already expecting to scratch until sleep arrived. That was everyday life. This isn't speculation. Medieval records and later accounts describe straw mattresses as standard furniture in poor households throughout Europe. In some regions, better-off peasants added a thin wool blanket, but for most, it was simply straw in a sack. Historians still debate whether these sacks lay directly on the floor or on basic wooden platforms. Excavations in Scandinavia suggest raised beds, while English cottages often show evidence of bedding placed directly on earthen floors. You roll onto your side, and the straw pokes through again, pressing into your shoulder. A sharp smell rises, pleasant at first, then sour, as damp straw turns musty. You wrinkle your nose and wonder how anyone managed to sleep. But people did. Long days of labor in fields or workshops left them exhausted. Tiredness overcame discomfort, and bodies pressed together softened the worst of the odors. One final detail. Some records mention peasants using chaff, the husks left after threshing grain, as bedding material. It was plentiful, free, and painfully sharp. Imagine sleeping on a sack filled with tiny, blade-like fragments. Hardly luxury, but when the alternative was frozen ground, gratitude came easily. As you settle again, you notice how loud straw bedding can be. Every shift makes itself known. A crunch, a squeak, a soft sigh. Children turning in their sleep would trigger a chorus of rustling sounds, echoing softly through the hut. Privacy was essentially absent, yet the soundscape of a medieval night had its own character. Creaks, snores, murmurs, scuttling animals, and the steady crunch of straw created the village's nightly lullaby. You shut your eyes and reflect on how people today view beds as personal sanctuaries. Here, however, a bed is simply a practical patch of ground, enough to keep you from the cold of the earth. Comfort was never the aim. Survival was. You wonder if your back could endure even one season on such an uneven pile. Long-term aches were likely common. Medieval records even mention remedies for stiff joints caused by lying down, often using warm herbal compresses. Scholars sometimes argue over whether hard bedding and poor posture shortened working lives, while others suggest relentless farm labor alone was enough. A sudden itch creeps along your arm. You scratch hard. It is not imaginary. Bedbugs plagued medieval life long before they became a modern hotel nightmare. Herbs such as pennyroyal, tansy, and wormwood were burned or tucked into straw to drive them away, though results were uncertain. Some peasants intentionally smoked their bedding, hanging sacks over hearths to kill vermin. The result was bedding that smelled like a fire pit, still preferable to infestation. In the corner, an elderly woman mutters about changing the straw tomorrow. She means emptying the mattress completely, discarding moldy chaff, and refilling the sack with fresh cuttings. This chore usually fell to women and children, and while unpleasant, it was necessary. Neglected straw beds could rot and spread illness. Historical sources note that hospitals and monasteries also relied on straw bedding, replaced regularly as part of hygiene. Even in the poorest huts, this knowledge was understood. You shift again, and a small cascade of straw dusts your face. You sneeze, waking a child beside you. The child laughs, pulls the blanket higher, and for a moment, despite the fleas, the itching, and the stale smell, you feel an unexpected sense of comfort. This rough heap of straw is not designed for ease, but it becomes warm when bodies are packed together. It is familiar. It is family. Still, your modern mind resists it. You long for springs, feathers, memory foam, anything that does not crawl. Yet peasants endured this night after night, year after year, and still rose to work. As you lie back, scratching absent-mindedly, you realize how much resilience is woven into every strand of straw. You exhale, your breath visible in the cold, and listen as the straw rustles and the household settles, waiting for true sleep. You shift again, still itchy from imagined crawling, and notice something else. There is no such thing as your bed here. The entire family sleeps together on one wide, sagging platform. You are pressed between shoulders, knees, elbows, and the sharp heel of a child who kicks in sleep. Privacy is irrelevant. In a medieval peasant's life, bedtime was shared, crowded, and shaped by necessity. The air is heavy with warmth from shared breath. Each inhale carries wool, smoke, and earth. Each exhale fades into pale clouds. The walls cannot hold heat, so the only reliable warmth comes from bodies pressed together. You turn your head and bump noses with a child. She giggles, then burrows under a patched blanket. A rough hand rests on your arm, perhaps a grandfather, perhaps an older brother. The touch is accidental, and you do not move away. Everyone depends on everyone else. A well-established historical fact is that across much of medieval Europe, entire households shared one sleeping space, often a single raised bed or a large mound of bedding. Court records and folk tales describe families piled together at night. This practice was not merely tradition, it was survival. In homes where temperatures dropped close to freezing, especially in northern regions, sleeping alone wasted heat. Even peasants with slightly larger homes usually crowded multiple people into one bed. As your body adjusts, you notice the careful sleeping order. Children are kept near the center, shielded by adults. Infants are sometimes swaddled against their mother's chest, wrapped so tightly they resemble small loaves of bread. Grandparents are often placed toward the edges, where it is colder, since younger bodies need warmth more urgently. This simple arrangement both preserved life and reinforced family bonds. Yet historians still debate the specifics. Did families always follow strict sleeping arrangements, or did practices vary by region? Some suggest that written descriptions of orderly hierarchies may reflect moralizing exaggerations by clerics uneasy with such physical closeness. Others argue that archaeological and folkloric evidence points to a practical system designed for warmth. The debate continues, and as you lie here with someone's knee pressed into your ribs, you suspect the truth lay somewhere in between. One small detail makes you smile. Medieval jokes often mocked overcrowded beds. Verses describe a man claiming he slept with his wife, children, servant, and dog all on one mattress, a kind of early stand-up routine. Even then, people found humor in a bed so packed you had to compete for space. You roll onto your back, staring at the soot-darkened rafters, and feel a weight on your stomach. A toddler has climbed over you, wriggling until he finds a hollow near your hip. His hair smells faintly of wood smoke and sour milk. He sighs and falls asleep. It becomes clear that for medieval peasants this closeness was more than practical. It provided emotional security. Children did not sleep alone in cold corners. They slept wrapped in the heartbeat of their family. But such closeness also brought strain. Imagine lying shoulder to shoulder with your entire household after a long day. Snores, shifting bodies, and the occasional flatulent release, beans were a staple after all, were part of the nightly soundscape. Irritation could not be hidden. You endured it, joked about it, and endured it again. You hear a cough from the far end of the bed, deep and rattling. An old man's chest wheezes with age and cold. Illness spread easily in such tight quarters. If one child brought home a winter fever, the entire family lay exposed. Mortality from influenza, pneumonia, and even minor colds was high in medieval villages. Physicians blamed foul air rising from the earth, while priests spoke of sin and divine punishment. The physical reality was simpler: too many bodies, too little ventilation, and no understanding of germs. The room settles into a rhythm. Someone snores unevenly. A child whimpers and is quieted by a mother's whisper. You close your eyes again, trying to relax into the press of bodies, and think about what this meant for identity. Modern life values individuality: your own bed, your own space, your own sleep. Here, the self blended into the group. Your warmth depended on others. Perhaps this built resilience, or perhaps it bred quiet frustration. Historians still debate whether communal sleeping strengthened families or created tensions. We can only infer. Your feet brush against something warm and furry. You tense, thinking it might be an animal, which would not be unusual. But it is only a sheepskin thrown over the bedding. The reminder remains. Boundaries between human and animal, indoors and outdoors, were thin. Livestock might even be brought inside for warmth, as often happened. For now, it is just family pressed together, breath rising in pale clouds, straw shifting beneath you. You notice, too, the steady rhythm of shared breathing. It is strangely calming, this steady rhythm of breathing around you. Your chest rises and falls in time with the others, as if your lungs have joined a shared chorus. You wonder whether this kind of unconscious harmony gave medieval sleepers a stronger sense of togetherness, or whether it simply meant that everyone stirred awake whenever a single person shifted in their sleep. Likely it was both. Another sneeze echoes through the room. A child wipes her nose on her sleeve. You recall reading that runny noses were a constant in winter, almost like a season of their own. Without tissues, people used whatever was nearby: wool, straw, even a neighbor's tunic, and no one thought twice about it. Life was untidy, shared, and intimate. The longer you lie there, the clearer it becomes that a family bed had nothing to do with comfort or romance. It was about endurance. It was about bodies packed together like stacked logs, surviving nights when the cold outside could be deadly. You picture snow building up against the door, wolves calling somewhere far off, frost slowly creeping along the inside walls. And here you are, wedged among snoring relatives, safe, cramped, uncomfortable, but alive. Perhaps people today underestimate how valuable that warmth must have felt. When all you had was straw, a worn blanket, and the combined heat of your kin, you stayed close not by choice, but by necessity. And within that need, perhaps there was a different kind of comfort. You sigh into the darkness, scratch your arm again, and let the low murmur of voices fade as sleep tugs at you once more. In the corner, the fire gives off one final spark before dimming, and the room sinks into deeper shadow. All of you breathing together, like a single fragile body waiting for morning. The fire has collapsed into a heap of glowing embers, and the hut feels darker still. Your nose twitches. There is a smell you did not fully register earlier: animal musk mixed with the sharp bite of manure and damp wool. At first, you think it has drifted in from outside. Then you turn your head and understand. A goat has wandered in through the door, followed by a pig rooting through the straw. You are no longer sharing space only with family. Tonight, the animals are settling in too. It may sound surprising, but for many medieval peasants this was simply practical. Records from memorial accounts in England and tax documents in parts of France suggest that most families owned only a handful of animals, perhaps a cow, a pig, some chickens, maybe a sheep or goat. These creatures represented wealth and survival: milk, wool, meat, and manure for the fields. To protect them from thieves and freezing temperatures, families often brought them indoors. If the house consisted of a single room, that meant people and animals sleeping side by side. You shift slightly as the pig drops into the straw with a heavy sigh. Its warmth spreads almost immediately. It is far from refined, but the advantage is obvious. A full-grown cow can produce more body heat than several people combined. Some historians point out that this habit helped peasants keep indoor temperatures bearable during the harshest winters. Others emphasize the drawbacks: dirt, illness, and the constant risk of a hoof in the dark. Scholars remain divided. Was this an ingenious solution or a desperate trade-off? Probably a mix of both. One curious tradition stands out. In some alpine villages, the family cow was called the hearth cow, because her warmth was considered as valuable as the fire itself. She provided more than milk, she radiated steady heat like a living furnace. Accounts from the 15th century describe families placing children right beside the animal, wrapped in blankets, so their small bodies could absorb her warmth. Lying here in the straw, you begin to understand why. The goat nudges against your feet, and the heat rises. Against all expectations, it feels almost comfortable. Still, it is far from pleasant. The goat sneezes, spraying you with moisture. The pig snores louder than any human, grunting and shifting, its smell so strong it turns your stomach. Fleas jump easily from animal fur into human hair. In spring, when animals gave birth indoors, people slept beside squealing piglets or calves wobbling on unsteady legs. The line between farmyard and sleeping space blurred until it vanished completely. Picture the soundscape. Chickens cluck and rustle in the corner. A cow's deep breathing fills the room. Hooves scrape against the packed earth floor. Add your grandfather's cough, your siblings' whispers, and the occasional crackle from the embers, and you have the full music of rural survival. Sleep came not from quiet, but from exhaustion, your body finally giving in despite the noise. Archaeologists digging up medieval homes in Scandinavia have uncovered animal stalls built directly into houses. In some English cottages, only low wooden barriers separated people from livestock, and in others, there appears to have been no division at all. The evidence suggests animals truly shared the living space. Researchers still argue about how common this arrangement was. Some believe it was nearly universal among the poorest households, while others think it depended on climate, with colder regions relying on it more. The lack of firm proof keeps the debate open. But tonight, in your mind, there is no uncertainty. You are nose to nose with a goat. You try to turn away from the smell, and your hand sinks into something wet. You pull back sharply. The pig has left behind a small mess in the straw. That, too, was part of daily life. Every morning, families cleared out manure, sometimes spreading it straight onto their fields. The bedding you slept on could later be shoveled up, waste included, to fertilize crops. Nothing was truly thrown away. Still, as you wipe your hand on a frayed blanket, it is hard not to think that modern ideas of cleanliness would never survive here. Animals were not brought inside for warmth alone. They were also a matter of protection. During hard winters, thieves were common, and losing a pig or cow could destroy a family's livelihood. Keeping animals indoors reduced that risk. Some medieval laws even imposed fines for nighttime livestock theft, suggesting how frequent the crime was. By sleeping beside your cow, you were not only staying warm, you were also keeping watch. There was another element as well: companionship. Chroniclers sometimes noted the affection peasants felt for their animals. A woman might sing softly to her cow. A child might hold a lamb as if it were a pet. On nights this long and cold, the comfort of another warm body, even in animals, may have been worth the trouble. You glance at the goat asleep near your feet, and despite yourself, you feel a brief sense of thanks. Of course, it was not without danger. Illness could pass from animals to people, though medieval villagers did not understand disease as we do. They spoke of bad air or curses instead. Later studies would suggest that zoonotic illnesses, such as tuberculosis, likely spread in these conditions. Experts still disagree on how severe these infections were, given the many other risks peasants already faced. But lying here, breathing smoky air, you can imagine the toll on health. The pig shifts again, its heavy body pressing against your side, and suddenly you are warmer than you have been all night. You exhale slowly, letting the heat sink into your bones, even as the stench makes your eyes sting. Survival often demands choosing practicality over dignity. In this small hut, with family on one side and animals on the other, peasants struck a balance. They tolerated the filth because the alternative was frostbite or death. The night drags on. Outside, snow taps softly against the thatched roof. Inside, the goat sighs, The cow moves, your sister snores, and the fire finally dies. You are wrapped in a web of human and animal life, bound together by necessity. You scratch at a flea bite, pull the blanket closer, and let the rough chorus guide you back toward sleep. And as you drift off, you wonder, once again, whether these peasants resented this closeness or simply accepted it as normal. Perhaps both. Either way, winter continues, and the animals remain near. The night drags on, and you grow more conscious of how delicate each layer of protection truly is. The wind scrapes against the wattle walls, slipping through tiny gaps, and without thinking you draw something thicker and heavier over your shoulders. It is a rough patchwork of furs, wool remnants, and worn cloth, sewn and resewn so many times that no original piece can be identified. You tuck yourself beneath it, thankful, even as the stiff seams rub against your chin. This is the reality of medieval coverings, more necessity than comfort. Surviving records from rural homes reveal that blankets and furs ranked among the most valued belongings. A plain wool coverlet might appear in estate divisions beside cooking pots and farm tools, because textiles were expensive to make and meant to last for decades. In poorer households, a single blanket often served everyone. The term quilt, as we use it today, was uncommon. What lies over you feels more like a pile of whatever could retain warmth. At times it was sheepskin, at times old garments stitched into larger sheets, and at times simple rags sewn together. As you shift, the covering slips, revealing a patch of coarse fur. It carries a faint scent of smoke, mutton fat, and sweat. Still, the warmth it holds is real. Wool, unlike linen, continues to insulate even when damp. Farmers understood this and spun whatever rough wool they could gather into thread for weaving. A few better-off peasants might barter for dyed fabric, though rich reds and deep blues were beyond the reach of most. Your blanket is a mix of brown, gray, and dull green, colors of endurance rather than style. One curious note from a 14th-century chronicle mentions villagers stuffing their covers with straw or reeds, turning blankets into something closer to padded mats. Every movement would produce a dry rustle, like resting inside a scarecrow. It was not comfortable, but it added a small barrier between skin and cold. You pull the blanket closer, half hoping not to hear that telltale whisper inside. As you huddle beneath the layers, you remember that these items were more than practical. They held emotional meaning. A mother's blanket might pass to her daughter and then to a granddaughter. Each patch told a story, a square cut from a worn tunic, another from an old apron. Every uneven seam joined fragments of family history. You might lack silver or land, but you possessed warmth, and that mattered. The fire crackles softly, sending a stray spark across the floor. Someone murmurs in sleep and tugs at the blanket, trying to pull more of it close. You feel the familiar struggle, and suddenly your toes are left bare in the cold air. This nightly contest over shared coverings was so common that medieval humor referred to it. One saying claimed it was better to marry for a blanket than for love, suggesting warmth could outweigh romance. Yet there was a harsher side as well. Chroniclers recorded arguments over stolen textiles. A blanket was valuable enough to be pawned or taken, and manorial courts sometimes fined villagers for stealing each other's coverings. The presence of such cases in legal records shows how essential these ragged layers were. No one faced winter without them. Scholars still debate whether poorer households owned true fur covers or relied only on coarse wool. In colder regions such as Scandinavia, archaeological finds suggest sheepskins were common, sometimes placed fur side down against sleepers. In milder climates, lighter cloth may have been all people had. The evidence remains uneven, leaving room for debate. You, lying beneath this smoky heap of skins and cloth, need no scholarly verdict. You understand the difference between trembling and enduring. Another faint scent reaches you. Lavender. Unexpected in this smoke-filled hut, but possible. Herbs were sometimes sewn into bedding to repel insects or provide fragrance. Women dried them in summer and tucked them into covers for winter use. Whether they truly kept fleas away is unclear, but the smell offered comfort. You inhale slowly, thankful for even a hint of sweetness in the heavy air. Your thoughts drift to noble households, where thick tapestries lined walls to block drafts, and beds were layered with velvet, silk, and imported furs. Compared to that, your rags seem pitiful. Yet nobles also complained of the cold, their stone chambers often colder than a peasant's smoky room. Wealth did not spare anyone from medieval winter. The difference was only in how soft the layers were that kept you warm. The pig beside you shifts and snorts, and your blanket slips once more. You grab it tightly, unwilling to lose your only shield against the frost. A goat noses at the edge, curious, and you push it away. Even animals understand the value of cloth in such cold. You smile faintly at the thought of defending your blanket from a goat in the middle of the night. A child rolls closer, pressing against your side, and you instinctively make room under the covering. That was the way of it. One blanket stretched across several bodies, each pulling, each giving in. Warmth was uneven, but at least it was shared. In those moments, survival became a quiet negotiation, held together as firmly as the seams of your ragged quilt. Outside, the wind groans, shaking the wooden door latch. Snow piles silently against the threshold. Inside, beneath patched wool and smoke-soaked furs, you endure. You scratch at a seam, catch the smell of mutton fat again, and sink deeper into the straw. The blanket irritates, the air stings, but warmth slowly builds, and that is enough. As you drift toward uneasy sleep, you wonder if peasants ever dreamed of feather beds, clean linen, or heated rooms. Perhaps they did, or perhaps after endless winters they accepted that patched rags and stubborn wool were not signs of failure, but of family. The threadbare comfort that kept them alive. The fire has dwindled to a dull red glow under ash, and you notice how quickly the cold returns. You inch closer to the hearth, though it offers little more than a suggestion of heat. Your eyes follow the slow curl of smoke that refuses to escape, trapped beneath the rafters like a ghost lingering above the room. You cough into your sleeve and realize that this smoky hearth is both your greatest comfort and your constant threat. Excavated cottages show hearths placed at the center of the floor with no chimney, only a small opening in the roof or wall. The idea of a contained fireplace with brickwork and a flue was a luxury most peasants never experienced. Instead, fires burned low and smoky, often filling the house until beams turned black. Archaeologists can still see this centuries later, soot preserved on timbers like marks of endurance. The embers you watch are what remain of carefully rationed logs. Firewood was never abundant. Written complaints from medieval manors describe fines for peasants who gathered wood without permission from a lord's forest. Rights to timber were tightly regulated, so every branch burned was valuable. You understand why the fire is allowed to fade. Making fuel last through a long winter night required restraint. One odd practice appears in folk tradition. Some families buried their embers under ash before sleep, covering them so the coals would smolder until morning. They called this the sleeping fire. At dawn, they stirred it awake with dry twigs, reviving it without striking flint. Imagine the relief of seeing faint red sparks still glowing at sunrise. Tonight, you crouch closer, gently shifting the ash with a stick, and you see why people treated fire almost as a living presence. But the truth is harsh. Smoke burns your eyes, making them water. It settles in your throat, scratching like grit. Medieval medical records describe chronic coughs, catarrh, and other ailments we now recognize as damage from smoke inhalation. Some modern scholars argue that constant exposure in these huts shortened lives, especially for women and children who spent more time indoors. Others suggest the smoke offered limited benefits, fumigating homes, discouraging insects, and slowing decay in the thatch. The scholarly discussion continues. Still, no statistics are needed to understand how suffocating this feels. Your eyes narrow as they water, and you imagine what years of breathing this air might do to your lungs. The fire was never meant only for warmth. It prepared every meal, heated every drink, and illuminated every hour of darkness. Without it, life simply stopped. Families protected their embers as if they were valuables. Historical accounts even describe neighbors lending live coals to one another, carrying them through the night in clay containers when a household fire went out. Matches had not yet been invented. Flint and steel were unreliable. Losing the hearth meant fear. Picture yourself trudging through snow to a neighbor's door, gripping an earthenware jar, hoping they still had a glowing coal inside. There is an intriguing detail recorded in some villages. Children were taught to whisper charms to the embers before sleep, asking the fire to rest peacefully and reignite by morning. Whether this was belief or reassurance, the ritual placed the hearth within the family circle. Listening to the soft hiss of smoke and the occasional crack of wood, it becomes clear why such closeness with fire felt natural. You extend your hands toward the glow. The warmth is faint, yet even the suggestion of heat calms you. The orange light casts shadows across the walls, odd shapes that seem almost alive. You think of countless winter nights when peasants sat quietly, watching the same shifting light, letting their thoughts drift. Perhaps they shared stories in hushed tones, murmured prayers, or simply stared until sleep arrived. Yet the hearth carried danger. Sparks could leap onto straw or rushes scattered across the floor, and a hut could be engulfed within minutes. Entire villages were vulnerable, since each home was filled with dry fuel. Town regulations in the medieval period often required fires to be covered or put out at night. This practice gave rise to the word curfew, derived from couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. In rural homes, however, enforcement was rare. You slept relying on the embers not to turn against you. A pig snorts from across the room, startled by a sharp crack from the fire. A child shifts, rubbing his eyes, then moves closer to the warmth. You pull the blanket higher around your shoulders and breathe shallowly to avoid the smoke. The hearth may be dimming, but its purpose is unmistakable. It is the delicate center of this single-room world, unreliable, unpredictable, yet essential. You imagine waking at dawn, stirring the ashes with iron tongs, feeding in twigs, coaxing the flame back to life. The family would gather for porridge or bread, all made possible by this small engine of survival. Without it, there would be no cooked food, no safe drink, no warmth at all. You realize how much faith rested on something so fragile. You reach out and feel the rags jammed into the opening. They are damp and stiff with frost, and when pressed, you sense air slipping through. Families used whatever they had, stuffing moss, straw, or even manure into gaps. One 15th-century household record mentions special winter cloths reserved specifically for windows, worn scraps meant for blocking drafts rather than clothing. The idea of keeping a collection of rags just to plug holes almost makes you smile. But as the cold creeps along your legs, the logic is obvious. Folklore even claims that some villagers used fish bladders as temporary window coverings. Once stretched and dried, they allowed a dim light while keeping out wind. Sleeping beside windows made of herring skin hardly sounds pleasant, but it was practical. The child beside you whines softly in his sleep, gripping your arm, and without thinking, you shift to shield him from the draft. That, too, was survival, using bodies as barriers against the cold. Sleeping arrangements were not only about rest. They were strategies. Elders often took the outer edges, children stayed in the center, and adults adjusted through the night. The rags might fail, but the human barrier remained. Scholars still debate how effective these draft-blocking efforts truly were. Some believe they served more as reassurance than real protection. Others argue that even slight reductions in airflow could prevent frostbite and make the difference between suffering and endurance. From this distance in time, certainty is difficult, but as you huddle here, every scrap of fabric feels essential. The wind rises again, rattling the frame. You imagine countless winter nights filled with that sound, the steady lament of air forcing its way through weak seams. Medieval texts sometimes gave the wind a voice, describing it as singing through the walls. Listening now, it does seem musical in a thin, unsettling way, rising and falling with each gust. Perhaps people learned to hear rhythm in it, a lullaby they never asked for but came to accept. Your thoughts drift to noble houses with their leaded glass, costly and delicate, glowing with candlelight behind colored panes. Compared to this torn opening, those rooms must have felt enchanted. Yet even nobles complained of drafts sneaking behind tapestries. Winter spared no one. For peasants, though, there was no buffer. The wind shared the room with you, unwelcome and persistent. The rags shift again, and this time snowflakes slip inside, melting as soon as they touch your blanket. You brush them away, teeth chattering. Someone across the room moves, mutters a curse, and wedges another plank into place. A brief knock echoes, then disappears into the night. Temporary fixes were always temporary. Tomorrow would bring more snow, more wind, and more searching for scraps to fill the gaps. There is an odd closeness in it all. Every object in the house, from torn clothing to leftover straw, becomes a weapon against the cold. Nothing goes unused. You imagine children sent to gather moss, mothers mending cloth, fathers cutting boards to size. Blocking drafts was not a single task but ongoing upkeep, as vital as feeding animals or tending the fire. Another drop of melted snow touches your forehead, sending a chill through you. You turn away from the opening and press closer to the cluster of sleeping bodies. The goat near your feet shifts, blocking part of the airflow. You relax slightly, silently grateful to an animal you once chased away. The whistling continues, quieter now, softened by the added plank. You let it fade into the background, a reminder that the hut is never sealed, that the outside always intrudes. Perhaps that acceptance was part of the medieval outlook, not defeating winter, but enduring it piece by piece, night after night. Your eyes close again, soothed by the muted sigh of wind and shared warmth. The rags may never seal the opening completely, but they hold well enough. And in this world, enough means survival. You shift beneath the patchwork blanket, and something rough rubs against your neck. This time it is not straw. It is wool, thick, coarse, unwashed. It scratches like grit, yet you pull it tighter regardless. In medieval life, night clothing was rarely different from day wear. The tunic you donned in the morning was the same one you slept in at night. Pajamas, as we understand them, did not exist. Records from monasteries and wills show that the standard peasant garment was a wool tunic, knee-length for men and longer for women. Often, it was their primary piece of clothing. When it thinned, it was patched. When it tore, another scrap was layered beneath. At night, the tunic stayed on, sometimes with a cloak or extra shirt if one was available. In colder regions, a hood or cowl covered the head, where much body heat escapes. You trace the edge of your hood now, thankful for its protection despite the itch. Some later accounts describe stuffing straw into socks or shoes for insulation. Picture going to bed with small bundles of hay wrapped around your feet. It was uncomfortable, but it reduced the cold. Tonight, your toes throb with chill, and the idea seems tempting. Historians still disagree on how many layers peasants wore during winter. Some suggest multiple tunics were common, removed only in warmer months. Others believe most people simply lacked enough fabric. Evidence differs by region. Scandinavian finds show heavier layered wool, while English peasant wills often mention only a single tunic. Lying here, scratching at the rough cloth, you sense the truth was uneven. Some families had choices. Others owned one set of clothing from cradle to grave. You lift your arm and inhale. The smell is strong, sweat, smoke, and the natural oil of wool. Washing clothes in winter was difficult, with frozen water and slow drying. More often, garments were brushed clean or hung near the hearth, the smoke helping to drive out lice. Your tunic carries the smell of every hearth you have sat beside, of daily work in fields and stables. It is a record written in scent, one you bring with you even into sleep. A curious detail appears in a 15th century English household guide. It advised that children sleep wearing their smocks, simple linen undergarments, to protect wool garments from excessive wear. This suggests that, when circumstances allowed, people valued their outer layers enough to remove them at night. Linen was lighter and cooler, but in icy huts, practicality often outweighed care. Tonight, you keep the wool on despite the itching, because the idea of undressing feels absurd. Your thoughts drift again to noble chambers, where fine linen nightshirts and even fur-lined robes were common. Some aristocrats slept in embroidered caps. The contrast is stark. While you endure coarse wool, nobles complained that silk slid too easily on feather beds. Yet for all these differences, rich and poor feared the same threat, the cold. The child curled against you wears a smaller version of your tunic, patched at the elbows. His hair smells of smoke, his breath warm against your chest. You pull your cloak over him as well, giving up your own warmth for his. This, too, was part of the nightly routine, redistributing scarce clothing and coverings so the most vulnerable survived. Parents often absorbed the cold so their children would not. Scholars still debate whether peasants owned clothing reserved solely for sleep. Some argue that poorer villagers must have removed outer layers at least occasionally, since constant wear would quickly destroy wool. Others maintain that survival mattered more than preservation, and that most people worked, lived, and slept in the same garments until they fell apart. Listening to the dying fire crackle, you lean toward the second view. When frost threatened your toes, warmth mattered more than fabric longevity. You scratch your sleeve again, wincing at its roughness. It is hard to think of this itchy tunic as comfort. Yet in the harshness of winter nights, it was valuable. Wool may irritate, but it insulates even when damp, holds heat, and lasts for years. You realize that every thread against your skin serves as a small defense in the long struggle against winter. The goat shifts near your feet, nudging your roughly clothed legs. You smile quietly. At least animals never complained about the coats they grew themselves. You close your eyes, pull the cloak tighter, and let the itch fade into the background. Perhaps peasants never imagined pajamas. Perhaps sleep was never about softness, only survival. And as you drift toward rest again, you think that scratchy as it is, this tunic stands between you and the frost rattling at the door. Your body stirs once more, restless on the straw. This time the cold does not come from a draft or a slipping blanket. It comes from the simple fact that you are packed so tightly among others that no position lasts long. An elbow presses into your ribs. A child's foot finds your stomach. You shift to claim a bit of space, but as soon as you move, another body follows. It is a strange pattern, half asleep and half deliberate, performed nightly in medieval huts, the shared choreography of sleep. Historical sources occasionally describe communal sleeping arrangements. In some households, people intentionally formed spoon-like chains, each back pressed to the next, so warmth traveled along the line. It is easy to imagine the rhythm. One person turns, and the whole chain rolls like a wave. In other homes, sleepers gathered in a huddle, feet toward the fire and heads toward the wall, creating a circle of heat. Archaeologists studying soot marks on floors suggest such habits left traces in straw bedding. Lying here in a crowded heap, you can almost see survival mapped into the ground itself. One unusual reference comes from a 14th-century French manuscript describing peasants turning like oxen yoked together in a field. It sounds mocking, yet you recognize its accuracy. There is a rhythm to this bed, and you cannot escape it. The child beside you moves. You adjust to make room. The old man wheezes, and someone props him against the wall. A goat presses closer, and everyone shifts around its weight. Sleep is not still. It is shared movement. And yet it is not random. Families developed unspoken rules. Young children stayed in the center, elders at the edges, parents in between to steady them. Sometimes, to preserve warmth, people slept head to foot, forming a patchwork of limbs so no chest lay exposed to the air. No matter how you try to claim privacy, you become one piece in a larger whole. Modern historians continue to debate how deliberate these arrangements were. Some believe they were planned nightly strategies for warmth. Others argue that people simply collapsed together after exhausting days, with order emerging only from habit. Evidence remains thin. Beds rarely keep their secrets, but you suspect both views hold truth. Strategies existed, yet exhaustion often shaped the final form. The lighter side of these practices appears in songs and sayings. One ballad mocks a husband who ends up beside the sow after his wife claims the warm center. A proverb warns, "He who sleeps at the edge wakes with the frost," reminding listeners that the unlucky spot against the wall was the coldest. Tonight, you understand this well. Your shoulder brushes the mud-plastered wall, and frost bites your skin like small teeth. You shift inward without apology, because the difference between edge and center is the difference between shivering and warmth. Still, tension lingered. Imagine spending every night pressed between relatives, hearing snores, feeling sweat, breathing shared air. Boundaries dissolve. Small humiliations become routine. A sneeze lands on your face. A cousin talks in his sleep. The pig rolls against your legs. At first it feels unbearable, then oddly familiar, as if your body accepts the disorder because there is no other choice. You recall monastic dormitories, where monks slept in rows, each on his own pallet, sometimes divided by low screens. The contrast is clear, communal but controlled, designed to limit bodily intrusion. In a peasant hut, there is no such order beyond necessity. The structure is looser, the closeness greater, the discomfort more frequent. Yet both systems share one reality. People rarely slept alone. Solitude at night was uncommon and perhaps even risky. As the night deepens, the movement continues. Someone turns in the chain, pulling the blanket with them. A series of groans follows. You hear quiet complaints. Give it back. I'm cold. Move your feet. Then a shuffle, a sigh, and a fragile truce. The cycle will repeat soon. You begin to understand that sleep here is less about rest than endurance. No one seeks perfect stillness. They aim simply to last until morning. The body learns to accept interruption, to adapt to noise, to tolerate pressure. What would exhaust you after one night was their lifelong routine. Scholars still disagree on whether this constant disturbance harmed sleep. Some argue peasants must have lived with chronic fatigue, their rest broken by noise and motion. Others suggest the human body adapts, finding deep rest even amid disruption. The truth likely falls between these views. Peasants probably slept more lightly and irregularly, but balanced it with segmented sleep, brief rests, and resilience shaped by necessity. The chain shifts again. This time you are trapped in the center, surrounded by warmth. Sweat gathers on your brow even as your toes remain cold. You exhale, aware of how little control you have. Yet there is also a quiet reassurance. To be part of this restless mass, moving with family and animals alike, is to share the weight of survival. No one avoids the discomfort. Everyone bears it together. A thin whistle of wind slips through the patched window. A bead of moisture falls onto your cheek. The elderly man coughs. The goat exhales in its sleep. You shift again, your elbow brushing against another body, and the whole pile reacts as if it were one living thing. Half awake, you consider that this may have been the real lesson of medieval nights. Comfort mattered less than togetherness. Sleep did not belong to one person. It was collective. Every movement, every pull of a blanket, every breath in the darkness joined a shared pattern. Within that awkward harmony, there was survival. You wake suddenly, unsure of the cause. The hut is quiet except for the steady chorus of people and animals breathing. Then you sense what is wrong. The fire has died down. The embers have collapsed into darkness, and the weak orange glow is gone. Cold creeps into the space, spreading low along the floor like mist. Someone stands carefully, avoiding children on the ground, and you understand that it is their turn to tend the fire. Medieval nights were seldom unbroken. What villagers sometimes called the midnight watch was essential. Fires had to be revived. Animals required attention. Threats existed beyond the walls. Even indoors, families often decided who would rise during the night to stir embers, feed livestock, or listen for danger. Without such care, morning could bring frozen water, aching limbs, or missing animals. You watch as the figure kneels by the hearth, gently blowing on the ash. A dull glow returns, and with a few twigs, a small flame takes shape. The crackle cuts through the silence, and the room seems to relax. Firewood is precious, so the man adds only one log before sitting back, eyes fixed on the flame. His thin face glows in the light, and you sense the responsibility resting on him. Historical records often refer to this interrupted pattern of sleep. Peasant life followed duties rather than hours. Someone always needed to wake. Some historians suggest this habit shaped a divided night, with periods of sleep separated by wakefulness. Others argue the interruptions were irregular, driven by necessity instead of custom. The debate remains open, but one fact is clear: an unbroken 8-hour sleep was not common in medieval life. One short story from a 15th-century German chronicle describes a villager rising at midnight to check animals and discovering a thief trying to steal a pig. His alertness protected the household's livelihood. Accounts like this help explain why night watch mattered. As you observe the man by the hearth, You imagine countless similar moments never recorded, lives protected and losses avoided because someone woke when needed. He does not return to sleep right away. Instead, he remains seated, elbows resting on his knees, watching the flames. This pause was also part of the rhythm. Nights stretched longer than modern experience allows us to easily imagine, and silence could feel heavy. People used these waking moments to think, pray, or repair tools by firelight. Monks observed formal vigils at midnight. Peasants had informal ones. You wonder how many thoughts and quiet prayers rose from glowing embers over centuries. The animals shift as he stands. The cow moves and exhales softly. The pig grumbles. He walks to check the pen, stepping around children asleep in straw. The cold must be harsh. Even inside, his breath fogs the air. He opens the door slightly, peers out, then closes it quickly. The draft slices through the hut, and you pull the blanket tighter. He mutters something, perhaps relieved that snow has not sealed the entrance, then returns to the fire. Scholars still debate how these duties were assigned. Some believe households rotated the task deliberately. Others suggest it fell naturally to parents, elders, or those already awake with infants or food preparation. Evidence supports multiple possibilities. Each home likely developed its own pattern. Tonight, this man carries the responsibility. Eventually, he lies down again at the edge of the bedding. His movement disturbs the others, and bodies shift, stretch, and settle. The cycle resumes. Sleep here is never complete. It is layered and shared. You think of your own nights, structured by alarms and schedules, and reflect on how unfamiliar this feels, yet how normal it must have been when darkness lasted 14 hours. It is worth noting that people sometimes used the midnight watch for tasks we now associate with daylight. A woman might spin wool. A man might fix a tool, both working by the small fire. These brief moments of activity made sense when daylight was scarce. The night was long, and while much of it was spent keeping warm, small portions could be reclaimed. You imagine quiet hands moving in firelight while the family sleeps nearby. The flame flares, then settles as the log burns down. It now holds enough strength to last until morning. The watcher sighs and curls back into the straw. Stillness returns. Gentle warmth spreads outward, slow and steady, and you allow it to draw you back toward sleep. Perhaps this was a subtle form of resilience. Accepting that rest came in parts, that someone always stayed awake, and that night was not something to defeat but something to manage. You breathe in the smoky air, cough softly, and let the faint crackle guide you toward rest, trusting that when the next watch arrives, someone else will rise. You are unsure how much time passes before your eyes open again. The fire remains low but alive, and the hut feels suspended between states. It is neither night nor morning, but something in between. The people around you stir gently, not with earlier restlessness, but in a calmer pattern. A woman whispers to a child. Someone murmurs a prayer. The old man coughs, then sighs, sounding almost comforted by wakefulness. You realize you are experiencing what scholars later called the two sleeps. Medical writings and personal diaries from as late as the 17th century describe this pattern across Europe. People did not expect a single stretch of rest. Instead, they slept after dusk, woke around midnight for an hour or two, then returned to sleep until dawn. During that interval, they prayed, talked, tended fires, checked animals, and sometimes visited neighbors. For them, this was ordinary. To you, accustomed to forcing 8 hours into one block, it feels unfamiliar, yet unexpectedly calm. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. The hut is dim but not dark. Embers paint the space with faint red light. The quiet is gentle now, filled with low murmurs. A boy asks if spring will arrive soon. His mother replies with a quiet story about St. Martin's cloak, spoken as though it belongs only to the night. The child listens, yawns, and falls asleep again. You understand that this time was not only practical, but cultural. Families filled it with stories, prayers, or shared silence. One court record even notes villagers meeting outdoors during this middle waking period. Picture lanterns glowing in doorways, neighbors exchanging words in freezing air before returning to bed. Night, in these moments, became a shared pause rather than a barrier. It may seem strange, but it occurred often enough to be documented. Experts still disagree on whether segmented sleep was universal or more common in certain regions and climates. What remains clear is that medieval nights followed a rhythm shaped by necessity, environment, and shared responsibility, very different from modern expectations of sleep. Some historians argue that only literate people recorded the practice of segmented sleep, making its prevalence among peasants harder to confirm. Others point to the realities of life, broken rest, tending fires, caring for animals and children, as evidence that it was almost inevitable. Sitting here, listening to the soft murmurs in this hut, you can feel the rhythm in your bones. It isn't exotic, it's natural. A curious note from a 15th-century French medical guide even suggested that the time between first and second sleep could be used for intimacy, implying that couples saw the pause as ideal. You smile quietly, though in a crowded bed with much of the household present, true privacy seems unlikely. Still, the advice highlights how normal this midnight interval was, integrated even into health recommendations. You lie back, staring at the rafters where condensation glints faintly. Your mind drifts more easily in this half-awake state. Perhaps this was part of its purpose, a mental space between day and deep sleep. People prayed, reflected, or planned tasks for the coming day. In an era with minimal artificial light, the body naturally followed the demands of darkness. Thoughts feel looser at night, as if the dark grants permission to wander. The pig grunts in sleep. The goat shifts. A child whispers another question into the night, this one about angels. His mother hums softly, offering no full answer. The sound merges with the crackling of coals. You realize this interval is not just practical, it's intimate, a quiet thread of connection within the long winter night. Thinking of modern life, people often force wakefulness late into the night with screens, then cram sleep into a fixed 8 hours. Here, darkness stretches long enough that 2 sleeps feel inevitable. The middle watch is not wasted but part of the natural rhythm, as predictable as the tides. Scholars debate whether this pattern faded because of artificial lighting or due to social changes that encouraged longer, consolidated nights. The jury is still out. In huts like this, during harsh winter, first and second sleep structured daily life. You feel your eyelids grow heavy again as whispers fade and embers glow softer. One by one, the family drifts back into their second sleep. The rhythm is as old as the thatched roof above. You follow, tucking yourself deeper into straw and wool, surrendering to dreams. 2 sleeps, stitched together, a pause at the heart of darkness. A quiet endurance that peasants never questioned, simply living as life dictated. Your eyes flutter open once more, but this time it isn't the cold or a dripping rafter that wakes you. It's the faint smell of something bitter and yeasty drifting across the room. You shift in the straw and notice an older man lifting a small clay cup to his lips. He swallows, sighs, and lies back with a contented grunt. He is drinking ale, a nightcap before returning to sleep. For medieval peasants, ale was as ordinary as water. In many regions, it was safer than water. Brewing killed harmful bacteria, and even low-strength ale carried enough calories to make it worthwhile. Surviving household accounts from England list ale in daily provisions, measured by gallons. Families brewed their own or purchased small amounts from neighbors. It was cheap, filling, and always available. At night, it also offered comfort. You watch as the clay cup passes from hand to hand. The liquid is pale brown, cloudy, and weak, around 2% alcohol at most. More like liquid bread than a modern drink. After a long day and a freezing night, it warms and soothes, dulling hunger. You take a sip, tasting malt and a faint sourness, rough but satisfying. Brewing records show some peasants flavored ale with herbs like bog myrtle or rosemary, giving it a sharp, resinous note. Tonight, you think you catch something herbal, perhaps the smoke from the hearth clinging to the cup. Either way, it steadies you, softening the bite of frost and itch. Researchers debate whether drinking ale nightly was a true custom or occasional, tied to feasts or labor. Some argue evidence shows routine use, others say grain was too valuable for casual brewing. Likely, it varied by village. Yet here, cup in hand, you see the appeal. Hunger and cold fade at least a little. The child beside you stirs, and his mother dips her finger into the ale, letting him taste it. He smacks once and drifts back to sleep. At first, this shocks you, but in a world without clean water or abundant milk, weak ale was a practical drink for children, providing calories and warmth. The hut's atmosphere shifts with each sip. An old man hums a fragment of a festival song. Another chuckles quietly. The bitterness of ale seems to loosen tongues even in this smoky dark. For a moment, the weight of winter lifts. You see that this simple drink was more than nourishment. It was a balm against despair. One medieval story even warns that a man who goes to bed without ale dreams of wolves, a superstition or a reminder of its comfort. Tonight you feel it. Without the faint warmth in your stomach, the cold would press harder. With it, sleep comes easier. Yet ale had limits. Even weak, too much could disrupt rather than soothe. Court records mention village fights from late-night drinking, and some priests warned that overindulgence led to sloth and sin. Even in private huts, excess could spark quarrels. Here, the quiet sip shared among family members calms rather than inflames. You shift under your blanket, eyes heavy, feeling warmth linger. The hut breathes softly in unison, the pig sighing as it curls into straw. Perhaps ale was not only safety and sustenance. Perhaps it was ritual, a way to close the day, mark the pause between wakefulness and second sleep, dull hunger, quiet thoughts, and carry warmth into dreams. You nestle deeper, blanket scratching your chin, closing your eyes. The faint taste of sour malt lingers as the wind howls outside. Inside, you drift, steadied by the oldest nightcap peasants knew. Suddenly you wake, scratching. The itching is sharp, insistent, maddening. Sitting up in straw, you brush your sleeve, but it worsens. Slowly, groggily, it dawns on you. This is no phantom sensation. It is life with bedbugs, lice, and fleas. The nightly companions of peasants across Europe were often unwelcome guests. Medieval texts, including sermons and household manuals, mention vermin in beds as if it were an ordinary part of life. Archaeologists have even discovered fossilized flea remains in layers of straw bedding, their tiny shells preserved like grim souvenirs. You scratch again, imagining the constant irritation these pests must have caused, never gone, always waiting in the dark. Historical remedies reveal that people tried to fight back with herbs. Families burned bundles of wormwood, tansy, or pennyroyal in their hearths, letting the smoke drift through the bedding. The scent supposedly drove pests away. You glance at the rafters, where dried leaves hang, releasing a faint bitter aroma. It is not perfume, it is pest control. Whether it worked is uncertain. Some historians suggest it offered mostly psychological comfort, while others argue that strong plant oils could repel insects to some extent. Tonight, though, the itching persists. A curious detail from a German household guide suggested scattering ashes into straw, creating a texture fleas disliked. The thought of lying on bedding dusted with soot makes you wrinkle your nose. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Around you, fellow sleepers stir. A child scratches his scalp, rubbing against a blanket, while an old woman mutters that the bugs are lively tonight. Such remarks were normal. Vermin were not shameful, only a nuisance to endure. Even monasteries and noble households reported lice, showing no social class was immune. Experts debate how harmful infestations truly were. Some claim they were merely tolerable background noise, ignored after years of exposure. Others insist they contributed to disease and exhaustion more than records suggest. The truth likely lies in between, rarely deadly, yet relentless, gradually wearing at health over time. Some families smoked their bedding, hanging straw sacks above the hearth to kill bugs. The result was fire-scented bedding that was at least slightly less infested. You inhale the smoky air and wonder if this household has done the same. Another remedy involved sprinkling aromatic seeds, like fennel or lavender, around the bedding. Whether effective or not, it at least added a sweeter scent to mask the stench of sweat and animals. Tonight, you imagine a faint hint of lavender cutting through the barnyard musk, making the hut feel almost pleasant. You scratch again, nails catching a seam in your tunic. The itch never fully disappears. This was the rhythm of medieval nights, not silence, but constant irritation. Families scratched, adjusted, sighed, and accepted it. Conquering the bugs was impossible. Living with them was the goal. One folktale claimed fleas were God's reminder of humility, small tormentors to keep humans from pride. Perhaps such beliefs made the bites easier to bear, or gave a reason to laugh through discomfort. Either way, the bites continued, and so did life. The pig snorts, scratching itself against the wall. You share the same battle. A child groans, slapping his legs, then curls into the straw. Eventually, exhaustion prevails. You lie down, still itching but too tired to care. As your eyes close, you realize resilience might not mean defeating pests, but choosing to sleep anyway. Scratching, sighing, resigned, you drift into uneasy dreams. You shift again in the straw, skin prickling. The hut feels slightly warmer, not because the fire has revived, but because someone has hung a sheet over the bed, creating a thin barrier that traps heat. You notice a makeshift canopy, a rope strung from wall to wall, cloth hanging down to section off part of the sleeping space. Even the simplest curtain could transform a winter night for peasants. Household inventories sometimes list a single cloth for the bed, not for decoration but for warmth. A drape, even of rough linen or patched wool, blocked drafts and offered a hint of privacy in crowded rooms. Sliding under it, you notice the trapped breath thickening the air. A 15th century account mentions a man whose wife sewed a canopy from old tunics, claiming it made their hut as warm as a noble's chamber. The boast may exaggerate, but the principle holds: even thin fabric can insulate. Tonight you feel the difference. Cold drafts from the window are muted, and bodies radiate warmth more effectively within this small enclosure. Scholars still debate how common bed curtains were among peasants. Some argue they were rare luxuries. Others believe resourceful families improvised with spare cloth. Archaeological evidence is scarce since fabric rarely survives. Yet the concept is simple enough that many probably tried it. You shift onto your side. The fabric brushes your cheek, smelling of smoke and wool grease. Not pleasant, but it shields you from dripping rafters. Suddenly, the room feels smaller, more contained, more yours. You imagine noble households, where heavy embroidered curtains enclosed entire beds, trapping warmth so well that sleepers might sweat even in midwinter. Compared to that, your patched sheet seems humble, but the principle is the same: fabric as armor against winter. In some rural villages, families hung a child's christening cloth above the bed for luck. Whether it kept spirits away or honored tradition, it added meaning to the canopy. Bedtime was never just physical, it was threaded with ritual. Perhaps this family's rope-hung cloth serves both practical and symbolic purposes. Outside the canopy, you hear the goat shifting, the pig snorting, the grandfather coughing. Inside, sounds are muffled, creating a pocket of stillness. Sleep comes easier here. Experts argue over whether such canopies truly improved warmth or if the benefit was mostly psychological. Some claim the temperature difference was minor, others note modern experiments showing thin barriers reduced drafts significantly. Likely, the truth is a mix: a few degrees warmer and a great deal of peace of mind. You stretch, brushing the fabric, feeling its fragility. Every patch shows years of mending, yet the care in the stitches speaks volumes. Families invested time sewing because every scrap of warmth mattered. You imagine a mother at dusk, stitching torn cloth by firelight, helping children sleep through another freezing night. The child beside you rolls closer, breath fogging the canopy. You tuck the edge around both of you, sealing your little tent. For a moment, the world outside, wolves, snow, thieves, darkness, feels distant. Illusion or not, it is powerful. Perhaps this is what peasants sought most on winter nights: small defenses. A rope and cloth, a scrap of fur, a shared blanket. None solved the cold entirely, but together they made endurance possible. You close your eyes, letting the muffled air wrap around you. Fleas still bite, smoke still lingers, wind still sighs at the window. Yet inside this patchwork canopy, there is a fragile sanctuary. And as you drift, you realize luxury was not gold or velvet, but the rare gift of sleeping one night without shivering. Half asleep, you hear another sound intrude, the village beyond the smoky walls. At first faint, then clearer, a dog barking down the lane, answered by another far away. A rooster crows too early, confused by the faint glow of embers. From beyond the hut, muffled voices drift in, someone staggering home from the alehouse, laughing too loudly. Once again, you notice how thin the walls truly are. Peasant cottages were never built to block sound. Wattle and daub was porous, and thatch carried noises as if it were nothing more than woven grass. Every neighbor's quarrel, every late-night song, every clatter of a bucket could be heard. Even court records from rural England note villagers complaining about nighttime disturbances, neighbors shouting, singing, or making noise after dark. Now, you hear a man's voice, slurred, trying to carry a tune. His wife scolds him, her sharp tone cutting through the night almost as clearly as if she were in this room. Folktales mention that people often use dogs barking as an informal clock. If dogs raised a chorus, it could signal strangers passing or predators near. Tonight, the dog's restless calls suggest both. You imagine foxes near the henhouse, or perhaps a thief creeping along the fence. The family stirs uneasily, everyone listens. In the dark, even distant sounds feel threatening. Scholars debate whether rural villages were truly quiet or unexpectedly noisy. Some argue that without modern industry, nights must have been calm, filled only with natural sounds. Others suggest that close living, animals, and communal life made villages perpetually loud. Likely, the truth lies somewhere in between. Silence in the fields, noise in the lanes. For you, lying here in this hut, the clamor is undeniable. The pig beside you grunts in response to the outside sounds. The goat lifts its head, ears twitching, then settles again. A child murmurs, asking if wolves are near. His mother whispers that it is only neighbors too full of ale. Her reassurance is calm, though her hand tightens on the blanket, as if to pull everyone closer. A small detail preserved in medieval proverbs states, "The walls have ears and the roof has a tongue." Cottages never kept secrets, every whisper could be overheard. Tonight, you hear that truth. When the drunken singer curses and trips, the whole lane seems to ripple with sound. You shift under your canopy, realizing how little privacy existed, not just inside the hut but outside as well. Everyone knew when a family argued, when a cow stirred, when a child cried. The noises of one house became the noises of all. Perhaps this bred community, binding neighbors together. Or perhaps it caused irritation, each household annoyed by the other. Historians still debate whether this closeness promoted harmony or tension. You suspect it did both. The rooster crows again, stubborn and insistent. Someone outside hurls a stone, shouting for silence. The bird pauses, then crows anyway, triumphant. You chuckle softly into the blanket, realizing that even centuries ago, humans battled noisy roosters. The dogs grow quieter, their barks dwindling to occasional growls. The lane falls mostly silent, though the drunk man's snores echo faintly from his doorstep. You imagine him collapsing outside rather than making it indoors, and you wonder if his wife will leave him there until morning. Inside the hut, the family settles again. The child's question about wolves lingers. True, danger existed beyond these walls. Wolves, thieves, even raiders. But often, the louder threat came from fellow villagers returning from feasts. Medieval nights were unpredictable, punctuated by human folly. You turn on your side, straw crunching beneath you, and let the muffled sounds wash over. Every bark, crow, and drunken song reminds you that this hut is not isolated, but part of a living village. Walls may be thin, but so are the lines between lives. Perhaps you think drowsily, this was both curse and comfort, never sleeping in complete silence, yet never entirely alone. The village hums even in the dead of night, reminding you that survival is shared. The rooster crows once more. You sigh, pull the blanket tighter, letting exhaustion drag you under. The medieval night's chorus fades into your dreams. You stir as the rooster crows again, now joined by a distant creaking wheel. Somewhere, a cart moves along the frosty lane, its squeal piercing the early dark. You pull the blanket higher, reminded that not everyone sleeps like you. Somewhere, a manor house looms. Its lord and lady may be asleep or awake. Yet, their nights are shaped by a different kind of bed. Records and surviving furniture show wealthier peasants lived in cottages with at least 2 rooms, sometimes with an upper loft. Their beds might have wooden frames instead of straw on the floor, covered with linen sheets and wool blankets. The real contrast appears higher on the social ladder. In the manor, carved oak bedsteads filled chambers hung with tapestries, layered with mattresses stuffed with feathers, hemp, or down. Compared to your scratchy straw sack, these beds seem unimaginable. And yet, comfort was not guaranteed even in those lofty rooms. Stone walls radiated cold, drafts slipped past shutters. Fires in great halls warmed only those close to the hearth. Some noble accounts complain of frost forming indoors despite luxury. The irony is striking. A lord might sleep under silk sheets, yet wake with his breath clouding in the air. One medieval satirical poem mocks a nobleman surrounded by 3 feather mattresses, still grumbling that his nose froze. The image is comical, yet revealing. Even wealth did not conquer winter. Researchers disagree on how great the gap was between peasant and lord sleep. Some argue nobles truly enjoyed greater comfort. Others emphasize that cold was a great equalizer. Both are valid. Tonight, scratching flea bites in a smoky hut, you admit you'd prefer a feather bed, but take comfort knowing a noble in a drafty manor may also be sneezing in frost. The difference was not just physical. Beds symbolized status. Noble bedsteads appear in wills as prized heirlooms, passed down generations. Peasants rarely mention theirs. Straw was too temporary to count. Nobles displayed carved posts, embroidered hangings, and locks on chambers. Sleep was both necessity and performance of power. You imagine slipping into such a room, tapestries on walls, candles low, fur-lined covers heavy as armor. Would it feel warmer than this smoky hut? Perhaps, but not necessarily safer. Theft records show manors were targeted, riches drew danger, while poverty offered little to steal. Another peculiar tradition of the wealthy was the tester bed, with curtains pulled tight. This cocoon trapped warmth, muffled sound, and blocked drafts. For peasants, the closest equivalent was the roper cloth pulled over earlier. The difference was degree, not kind. Both poor and rich sought the same, a barrier against winter. Scholars debate whether peasants envied noble comfort or accepted their lot. Some argue envy was fierce, others note folktales mocking rich sleepers, suggesting humor-tempered admiration. Likely, truth was complex, envy softened by humor, bitterness balanced with acceptance. The cartwheel clacks again outside. You picture servants already stoking fires at the manor. Lords may rise later, stretching in feather beds, but maintaining even luxury required constant work. Sleep was never entirely private. Servants tended fires, beat mattresses, fetched warm stones. In some ways, the smoky hut feels more honest. You do with what you have. No illusions. The rooster crows once more, its sound carrying across both cottage and manor alike. In that moment, the symmetry becomes clear. Rich or poor, everyone is stirred by the same bird, chilled by the same wind, threatened by the same winter. The gap between straw and feather exists, but it is not infinite. Huts and halls alike resonate with coughs, snores, and whispered prayers for comfort or mourning. You settle back into your straw, idly scratching. Comfort, it seems, is relative. A lord curses his icy nose. You curse the fleas. Both endure, waiting for dawn. Perhaps sleep itself is the ultimate equalizer. Regardless of your bed, everyone must close their eyes, trusting that night will pass and morning will return. You awaken again, this time to shuffling near the hearth. It isn't the family, the familiar shapes still huddle in straw, but strangers. A knock must have come earlier. Quiet voices answered, and now 2 figures step inside, stamping snow from their boots. Travelers. Their cloaks stiff with frost, faces pale in the emberlight. The family moves without hesitation, lifting a blanket and gesturing them closer. You blink, surprised, then remember, In villages like this, hospitality wasn't optional. Records from memorial courts and church registers often mention strangers sharing the same floor, straw, even blankets. Roads were rough, inns rare, nights long. A wanderer left outside risked death. Communities knew this, so doors, thinly barred at best, often open to outsiders. It was survival and obligation. Refusing shelter could bring shame, even fines. The travelers kneel by the hearth, cupping hands over faint coals. Steam rises as snow melts from their boots, filling the hut with a damp smell. The pig grunts uneasily, the goat bleats. Soon both settle, sensing no danger. The family offers a corner of straw, and within minutes, the travelers lie down, cloaks still on, joining the tangle of warmth. A peculiar note appears in a 14th-century English chronicle. A beggar given shelter in a cottage was accused of stealing a spoon by dawn. The case ended with fines and gossip, but it highlights how fragile trust could be. Tonight, you notice how the family tucks their few possessions closer, a wooden bowl, a knife, before closing their eyes again. Generosity, yes, but not naive. Scholars still debate whether this sharing of space was routine or occasional. Some argue rural cottages regularly hosted travelers. Others suggest it was limited to desperate winters. Written records are scarce, but in the bitter cold of this hut, the logic feels clear. Survival often required sharing, whether willingly or not. The newcomers shift beside you, their breath misting the air, mixing with the humid fog thick inside. Their rough wool cloaks brush against yours, crusted with snow. They smell of horse sweat and smoke, unfamiliar yet familiar at once. Every traveler carries this sense of exposure. A child beside you murmurs a question, "Are they good men?" His mother whispers, "All men are God's children on a freezing night." It is an answer more hopeful than certain, but the boy accepts it and drifts back to sleep. You remain awake longer, listening to the subtle rhythm of strangers' breathing, wondering how many such nights villages endured. Safety weighed against compassion. A folk belief from parts of Germany advised families to welcome guests on winter nights, lest Christ himself arrive in disguise. Hospitality was not just charity but spiritual insurance. Refusal could mean damnation. You glance at the travelers, their faces softened in sleep, and wonder if peasants saw each guest as both danger and potential blessing. The straw rustles as one stranger shifts, pulling the blanket higher. Warmth spreads across the heap of bodies. More bodies often meant more comfort. Practical needs often outweighed suspicion. Perhaps this explains why grudges were set aside, why even rivals might share a bed on bitter nights. Cold killed faster than hatred. Scholars differ on peasants' feelings about such arrangements. Some suggest resentment, others argue acceptance as natural. Diaries from the poor are rare, leaving uncertainty. Yet as warmth spreads from the strangers, you suspect gratitude often outweighed resentment when frost rattled the shutters. The hut settles into silence. Outside, snow mutes the world. Inside, family and travelers merge into a single breathing organism. You close your eyes, realizing that survival required not walls but willingness to let others in. Perhaps that is the clearest lesson. In a medieval winter, trust was practical, not abstract. Sleeping beside a stranger was not foolish. It was sometimes the only way to see dawn. Your mind drifts. Bells ring faintly, not village bells, but monastery bells. In your half-dream, the straw floor gives way to stone. Peasant chatter is replaced by the measured silence of monks. You imagine a winter night in a cloister, where sleep is discipline. Monastic rules like Saint Benedict describe large dormitories, rows of narrow pallets on cold stone floors. Each monk in his space, often fully clothed. Thin wool blankets, scarce fire. Comfort was seen as temptation to sin. Some slept upright in chairs, guarding against sloth. You shiver, realizing even prickly straw feels indulgent in comparison. Cistercian records note novices slept belted, never removing clothes, ready to rise for midnight prayers. You hear that bell in your imagination, thin, metallic, echoing across stone halls. Austerity had costs. Chroniclers noted frozen ink in scriptoriums, frost on blankets. Some suffered frostbite or lung ailments. Scholars debate whether such denial strengthened faith or only broke bodies. Some see resilience, others see hardship disguised as piety. No single answer exists. The contrast to your smoky hut is striking. In the village, bodies pressed together for warmth. In monasteries, distance and discipline prevailed. Yet both faced the same challenge: long winter nights without insulation. You scratch your arm and imagine a monk doing the same, cloaked in wool, upright against a wall. One story from a Benedictine house notes monks slept with shoes on, ready for vigils. Perhaps exaggeration, yet it hints at constant readiness. You laugh softly at the thought of sleeping with boots on, but maybe it was true. Stone corridors are colder, drafts slide along walls, chants lingering even in silence. Monks chose austerity, peasants endured necessity. Which is harder, enduring without choice or with devotion? Some researchers suggest monastic sleep discipline influenced broader culture. Villagers nearby might adopt segmented nights or nightly prayers. Others argue influence was minimal. As with much of the medieval world, certainty escapes you. Still, tonight the resonance is clear. Hut or cloister, winter nights carved both body and soul. Peasants and monks woke at midnight, one to stir embers, the other to sing psalms. Both endured cold, one with animals, the other with prayer. Stone fades, the smoky hut returns. Straw pricks your back, animals shift nearby. Yet you carry echoes of that other world. Sleep in the Middle Ages was never simple, never soft, always shaped by duty, faith, or survival. You sigh, pulling the blanket higher, grateful for every body pressed close. Monks chose austerity, you here in this hut, are thankful for every goat, pig, and child sharing warmth. Perhaps that is the truest difference. Monks sought holiness through discomfort, while peasants sought survival. In the long, dark nights of winter, each found what they needed in their own way. You drift between half-dreams until a shiver wakes you. This time, it isn't the damp straw or biting fleas, it's a vision. A chamber stretches larger than the entire cottage you slept in. Stone walls rise high, tapestries hang like oversized rugs, their colors muted in shadow. Somehow, you've left the smoky peasant hut and wandered, at least in your imagination, into a castle. It's easy to assume life behind castle walls meant luxury. Beds carved from oak, mattresses stuffed with feathers, layers of furs. Inventories from noble households list bedding as lavish as jewelry, imported linens, velvet covers, fine sheets. Compared to your straw pallet, it seems paradise. Yet stone, however grand, is colder than mud. Tonight, in this imagined chamber, you feel drafts slipping under doors, crawling through shutters, seeping across the floor like invisible serpents. A 14th-century French noblewoman wrote of frost forming on her curtains. Even surrounded by silk and furs, her breath froze. The gap between splendor and suffering is almost comical. Frost pays no attention to wealth or clothing. Historians debate how effective noble sleeping arrangements were. Some claim layered hangings and featherbeds created genuine comfort. Others emphasize that large, drafty halls made warmth elusive. Evidence supports both. Wealth helped, but winter remained relentless. Still, there were comforts peasants couldn't imagine. Nobles sometimes used bed-warming pans. Metal trays of embers slid beneath the sheets. Sparks were a real danger, but the practice continued. Peasants had heated bricks or warm animals. Both solutions tell the same story: no one liked icy bedding. Some Scottish castles reportedly kept comfort hounds at the foot of beds. Their warmth, not their barking, was valued. You picture a lady tucking furs around her shoulders, feet pressed against a small dog. In your smoky hut, you smile. Peasants had pigs and goats, nobles had hounds. Everyone borrowed warmth where they could. The sounds differ too. Instead of grunting pigs, you hear timbers groan, wind whistle through arrow slits, guards' footsteps echo overhead. The cold here is grander, yet equally sharp. Nobles endured noise and restlessness too, just of a different sort. Historians debate whether noble families shared chambers or had privacy. Some records show entire households, Children, attendants, even servants, crowded into rooms with their lords. Others suggest separate rooms based on rank. Likely, practices varied by wealth and era. Regardless, few slept entirely alone. Darkness encouraged clustering. Even castles weren't immune to pests. Bedbug remedies appear in noble and peasant guides alike. Furs and feathers hid as many vermin as straw. Luxury didn't mean safety. You scratch again, imagining a princess cursing the same itch. Tapestries stir in the draft. Embroidered saints and hunting scenes meant as much for insulation as decoration. They trap heat and sound, making the room less cave-like. In your hut, patched cloth hangs on a rope. 2 worlds, 1 purpose. Experts disagree on whether grand chambers offered real comfort or were symbols of power. Some say nobles slept better, others argue they were just as cold and restless. Evidence suggests a modest improvement. Better than straw, worse than dreams. Wind howls outside, shutters rattle, guards cough overhead. In the bed, bodies shift under furs. Medieval winter always claimed part of the battle. Perhaps that's the symmetry. Peasants and nobles alike endured the same season, the same wind, hoping for the same dawn. The imagined chamber fades. The smoky hut returns. Straw scratches your back. Goats shuffle. Yet you carry the echo of the castle. Comfort is relative. A small hand brushes your arm. It's the youngest child, eyes half closed, cheeks flushed, fingers icy clutching your sleeve. You shift to make space. Soon he burrows under the blanket, pressing close. In peasant huts, bedtime always began with children. Household accounts show youngest children were tucked in first, long before adults. The reason is simple. Children were most vulnerable to cold and illness. Adults stayed up tending fires, finishing chores, or keeping watch. Tonight you see it in practice. The youngest sleep, adults murmur by the coals. A 14th-century English parish record notes mothers find if infants froze in bed, a reminder of constant danger. You stroke the child's hair, aware of how fragile life could be. Older children lie tangled beside you, elbows and knees sharp, murmuring in dreams. A father at the bed's end forms a barrier against the cold wall. Scholars debate whether this was intentional strategy or instinct. Either way, the pattern is clear. Protect the young by surrounding them. The hut smells of wool, smoke, and damp straw. Children are prepared for bed with care. Muddy shoes removed, feet warmed, wrapped in tunics worn all day. Extra garments were rare. A mother's lap might serve as a blanket until the child was drowsy enough for the straw. Night after night, winter after winter, this routine repeated. Dutch folklore suggests children were told angels watched them sleep only if they lay still, a trick to encourage quiet. Tonight, exhaustion does the work, and the spell is unnecessary. Older siblings whisper, giggle softly, then hush when mother looks. Adolescents had duties: stir embers, fetch water, watch animals, before collapsing into bed. Childhood ended early, sleep reflected responsibility. Youngest were pampered with warmth, older children earned rest. Experts debate medieval parenting. Burdened peasants couldn't indulge children, yet lullabies and protective practices suggest tenderness. Lying here with a child curled against you, small hand gripping your sleeve, the care is undeniable. Despite hardship, families shielded children first. The mother finally lies down, drawing another child close. The father adjusts the blanket, covering as many little bodies as possible. A goat shifts at the foot of the bed, lending its warmth. Slowly, the hut grows quiet again, interrupted only by occasional snores and coughs. One detail from memorial court rolls notes children sneaking out at night to steal food from pots left by the hearth. The fact that such mischief was recorded and punished shows just how constant hunger was. You smile faintly, imagining the tiptoeing children and their quiet giggles. Tonight, though, exhaustion is too heavy for any midnight adventures. You lie still, surrounded by the soft, uneven breathing of the children. Their warmth seeps into you, fragile but real. For peasants, bedtime was more than rest. It was a rehearsal for resilience. Each night tested whether the family could keep its youngest alive, and each morning proved that their care, however makeshift, was enough. You close your eyes, letting the little hand on your sleeve anchor you. Perhaps luxury was never about furs or feathers, but this, the simple relief of knowing the children will wake in the morning. A sudden cough jolts you awake. At first, it's a single thin wheeze, then it spreads. The child beside you, the grandfather at the edge of the bed, even a traveler huddled near the hearth. The smoky air feels heavier, damp, and you realize this is more than straw or fleas irritating the lungs. Illness has entered the room, spreading as quickly as breath. Contemporary parish records often note spikes in winter deaths, especially among infants and the elderly. Pneumonia, influenza, bronchitis. Though not named as such in medieval terms, the symptoms are familiar. Fevers, chest pains, and recurring winter illnesses appear repeatedly in account books and death rolls. Listening to the chorus of coughs tonight, you understand why. One sneeze could fill a hut with contagion. In the dim glow of embers, the mother wipes a child's nose with her sleeve. The old man leans against the wall, each breath rattling, face tight with fatigue. In modern times, medicine or hospitals might offer relief. Here, it means prayers, herbal remedies, and hope. And sometimes loss. One 15th century guide suggests warming onions in ashes and pressing them to a coughing child's chest, believing the vapors drew out sickness. Another mixed honey with vinegar to soothe throats, though it did little for lungs. You imagine the family preparing these remedies tomorrow, clinging to any comfort while illness lingers. Scholars debate how devastating winter illnesses were. Some argue records exaggerate mortality, focusing on deaths over recoveries. Others maintain winter sickness was the greatest annual threat, even above hunger. Evidence is fragmentary, but listening to the child beside you, you feel the fragility of life in every sound. Ters, families burying more than they birthed. Archaeological studies of medieval cemeteries show high child mortality, with many graves containing children under 5. Tonight, you lie beside one such fragile life, clutching his hand as if to anchor him to the living. The mother murmurs a prayer, lips moving silently, eyes fixed on the fire. Faith was often the only medicine peasants possessed. Priests prescribed prayers, saints were invoked for protection. Saint Blaise, in particular, was believed to guard against throat ailments. How many whispered appeals to him filled nights like this? Superstitions, too, lingered. In rural France, hanging iron near the bed was thought to cut fever. Whether symbolic or hopeful, charms like this filled households, perhaps even this one. Exhaustion eventually overtakes sickness. The coughing quiets. Sleep is no longer only about warmth, but survival. You listen not to snores, but breathing, counting each rise and fall of the child's chest, reassured only when he shifts against you. Experts debate whether peasants accepted illness with stoic resignation or fought it with remedies and rituals. Likely, both responses coexisted. Tonight, you sense both in the mother's eyes, resolve to endure, and quiet fear of loss. You close your eyes again, uneasily. Every startle, every sigh keeps you alert, but eventually exhaustion claims you. The hut grows quieter, coughs fade into shallow snores. You drift with them, knowing dawn will not answer every question. Who survives? Who worsens but still offers light? And light itself is a kind of cure. Perhaps the harshest truth of medieval winters is this: survival was not only warmth, it was luck. To sleep through a night of coughing and wake breathing was victory enough. You tighten the blanket around the child, feeling his small body steady against yours, and sink into another fragile stretch of rest. The air is heavy, still scented with smoke and sickness. A new sound drifts in, not the moan of wind or bark of dogs, but music, faint, distant, real. Bells ring, voices raised together. Christmas tide. For a few days each winter, village life changed. Chronicles describe bonfires in the square, carols echoing through lanes, and even peasants who lived on bread and turnips tasting roasted meat and warm drinks. You imagine the glow spilling across snow outside a towering fire, the air filled with smoke and song. Inside, the family stirs. The mother rises, pulling a cloak around her shoulders, and opens the door. Cold air rushes in, carrying distant merriment. Children wake, murmuring, and soon the hut is alive with whispers. Even the old man coughs less, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Festival nights pierced winter gloom with warmth beyond the physical. In England, the wassail bowl, a pot of ale spiced with apples and cloves, passed from hand to hand, a rare treat for peasants. Sometimes singers carried bowls house to house, blessing neighbors for food. Scholars debate how inclusive these festivities were. Some say peasants pooled resources generously, others insist wealthier villagers hoarded the best foods. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Yet songs and stories emphasize communal warmth, suggesting festivals offered real respite. The pig grunts as children tug at its ears, begging parents to join the procession. The mother shakes her head, smiling wearily, then nods. Bundled in cloaks, the family steps into the night. You follow, blinking at the sudden brightness. The square glows with a towering fire. Sparks leap into the sky, mixing with snowflakes. Villagers dance in circles, voices joyful. Someone beats a drum, another strums a lute. The rhythm is infectious, a shock after so many nights of silence. The cold still bites, but the warmth of the fire touches your cheeks. For once, you are not shivering in straw, but swaying among neighbors, laughter rising around you. You feel that rare relief that comes when hardship pauses, even if only for a short time. The villagers know hunger will return tomorrow, that illness hides in every cough, yet tonight they celebrate. One unusual tradition recorded in German towns was the Christmas mask. Men would don animal skins and horns, stomping through streets to scare away evil spirits. In the flickering firelight, you catch sight of such a figure, a man wrapped in goat hide, leaping and bellowing. Children shriek, half in fear, half in delight. The ritual is chaotic and strange, but its purpose is clear, to protect the community from winter's cruelty. Later, back in the hut, the change lingers. Children, flushed from firelight and sweet cakes, fall asleep quickly, smiles on their faces. The old man hums a carol under his breath. Even travelers seem softened, suspicion eased by shared celebration. The air is no warmer, the straw no softer, but the mood has shifted. Spirits are lifted, hearts lighter. Survival feels possible once again. Experts debate whether these festivals served religious devotion or social necessity. Some emphasize the church's role, while others see them as ancient communal rituals repurposed. Either way, they mattered. In the bleakness of medieval winter, a feast was more than food. It was proof that joy still existed. You lie back, belly warmed by spiced ale, head filled with music. Outside, the fire crackles faintly as villagers drift home. Inside, the hut breathes easier. For one night, the weight of despair lifts. Perhaps the greatest function of winter festivals was not to erase suffering, but to remind everyone that life was more than hardship, that laughter, song, and warmth could pierce even the darkest nights. You close your eyes with that thought, a faint smile on your lips, letting the memory of fire carry you into sleep. Sleep comes easily after the feast, but it is heavy and vivid. You drift into a dream that feels almost real. Hunger follows you even in sleep, shaping visions in strange ways. This was true for peasants across the Middle Ages. Their nights were not filled with gentle slumber, but with dreams shaped by cold, want, and faith. From medieval sermons and folktales, we know dreams were often seen as messages from God, saints, or even devils. People would wake and recount them by the fire, seeking omens. Yet most dreams, scholars note, likely stemmed less from the supernatural than from empty stomachs and freezing beds. Tonight, you sense it yourself, visions of bread, glowing fires, and summers long past. A curious note from a 14th-century physician's manual claims that eating garlic before bed produced dreams of demons. You chuckle, imagining a peasant blaming his nightmares on the evening stew. Whether garlic was truly guilty or not, people were fascinated by the link between food and dreams. Hunger shaped them in unusual ways. You turn in the straw, half aware of the child's breath against your arm, and your dream shifts. You walk barefoot through snow, searching for the hut, but the door never appears. Such anxious dreams were common. reflecting the constant fear of being caught outside after dark. Chronicles tell of villagers frozen mere yards from their doors during blizzards, and it's easy to see how these fears carried into night visions. Scholars disagree on how seriously peasants treated dreams. Some evidence shows they recorded them in confession, seeking guidance. Other accounts suggest they laughed at them in the morning, dismissing them as tricks of the stomach. The line between sacred and ordinary blurred easily in medieval thought. The mother beside you stirs, murmuring in her sleep. You hear fragments of words, names, perhaps a prayer, and wonder if she dreams of saints or of fields. A French folk tale recalls a father telling his children that dreaming of green meadows in winter was a blessing, proof that spring would come. You cling to that thought as your vision shifts. Snow melts into streams, grass pushes through, but nightmares linger. In medieval law, demons called mare were said to sit on sleepers' chests, pressing them into suffocating dreams. Even today, we call it a nightmare. You wake briefly, heart pounding, breath shallow, only to realize it was the pig pressing against your side. Relief washes over you, and you understand how such legends grew. One superstition in parts of England advised placing a knife under the bed, blade outward, to ward off bad dreams. Another suggested reciting a charm to Saint Michael before sleep. Did these rituals work? Likely no more than garlic or onions, but they brought comfort, and comfort itself is a kind of remedy. The hut fills with the steady chorus of snores and murmurs. Each sleeper is caught in their own world, visions of food, saints, and fears. Perhaps that was another form of survival, the mind in sleep creating warmth when the body could not. Experts still debate whether dreams influence decisions. Did a peasant truly act on a vision of a saint or simply return to work? Some accounts suggest entire villages altered plans based on dreams. Others suggest skepticism. When nights stretched endlessly, dreams carried weight simply because there was little else to occupy the hours. You turn again, straw crunching beneath you, drifting into another vision. This time you stand in a field of wheat, golden and endless, the sun warm on your skin. It feels too vivid to be illusion. Then a rooster crows, and the dream begins to fade. Still, the warmth, the plenty, the promise of life beyond frost lingers. As you return to waking, you realize dreams were perhaps the only luxury shared equally by all. Lords in feather beds and peasants in straw alike wandered through visions shaped by hunger, fear, and hope. Comfort varied, but the mind's theater belonged to everyone. You pull the blanket tighter, holding onto the image of golden fields a little longer. In the cold dark of the hut, the dream is gone, but the hope it planted remains. Sometimes that was enough to sustain peasants until spring. The rooster crows again, distant but insistent, and you stir from the dream. The hut is still cloaked in darkness, but the mood has shifted. It feels heavier, as if unseen eyes press against the walls. The child beside you whimpers in sleep, murmuring about shadows at the door. His mother strokes his hair, whispering a prayer, and you realize you've entered another layer of the medieval night. People of this age believed darkness was not empty. Spirits walked in it, demons slipped through cracks, and witches sometimes prowled unseen. Winter, especially, was feared as a time when gates between worlds opened. To sleep safely, peasants armed themselves with blankets, fire, charms, and whispered words of protection. Tonight, that belief feels present, hovering above the rafters. In rural England, iron scissors were sometimes placed on windowsills to cut night spirits. Salt was sprinkled at doorways to keep witches out. You glance at the patched window, half expecting to see such objects glinting in ember light. Perhaps they are already there, hidden beneath rags and straw. A story from German folklore tells of the Alp, a creature pressing on sleepers' chests, stealing their breath. Villagers blamed it for nightmares and sudden suffocation. You chuckle nervously, how much like waking under the heavy weight of a pig it seems. Even superstition, you realize, often had a kernel of truth in lived experience. Scholars still debate how seriously peasants believed these tales. Some argue they were light-hearted stories for children. Others insist they were taken with deadly seriousness. Court records of witch trials show fear could become lethal. Yet many folktales treat spirits with humor or mockery. Belief often existed on a sliding scale, comforting at times, terrifying at others. The old man at the edge of the bed mutters a prayer aloud, calling on Saint Michael to guard the hut. His words blend with the sound of wind clawing at the door. A goat shifts uneasily, letting out a small bleat, as if echoing the unease in the room. You find yourself straining to hear every creak of the thatch, every whistle through the cracks, momentarily convinced that something might actually be watching. One French village superstition warned against pointing at the moon at night, lest spirits trace your finger inside. Children were scolded for it, told that witches loved entering homes that way. You picture mothers gently shushing their little ones near doorways, reminding them that the night followed its own rules. An unusual note appears in a 15th-century English sermon. It cautioned against singing loudly after midnight, claiming it could attract demons. You smile faintly, recalling the drunken village song outside earlier. Perhaps, if demons were listening, they joined in. The child presses closer, whispering again about shadows. You assure him softly that the blanket is a shield, strong enough to keep spirits away. His eyes close, soothed more by your voice than by the cloth. Maybe that was the true purpose of such beliefs, to ease fear, to turn chaos into rules people could follow. Experts remain divided on whether superstition truly helped peasants sleep or whether it deepened anxiety. Some argue charms offered psychological relief, allowing rest. Others claim they reinforced fear, reminding villagers nightly of hidden dangers. Perhaps the truth depends on perspective. Tonight, you feel both, comfort in prayer, a shiver at every unexplained sound. The hut breathes steadily, yet you are slower to relax. You watch the rafters, half expecting condensation drops to form glowing eyes. Of course, nothing happens. Still, the sensation of being watched lingers. You remind yourself that every culture invents stories for the unknown, and the medieval world simply had more unknowns. Gradually your eyelids grow heavy. The goat quiets, the child sinks deeper into sleep, and the old man's muttering fades. Wrapped in superstition, you drift off, half convinced that angels and demons guard the bed. Perhaps winter nights were battles not just against cold, but against imagination, against the sense that darkness was filled with forces beyond control. Peasants may have survived by believing, naming their fears, and wielding charms against them. You pull the blanket high, letting the hut settle into silence. Whether spirits lurk outside or not, the family sleeps on. Dawn will come. Until then, faith and fear hold vigil together. The night drags on, and though your eyes are closed, you remain aware of every creak and sigh. Gradually, another sound rises, voices, low at first, swelling into a rough, melodic murmur. You realize it comes from within the hut, the family murmuring prayers, some half asleep, some fully awake. In this world, religion does not rest, even at midnight. Medieval peasants lived to the rhythm of bells and saints' days. Inside their homes, prayer marked private moments too. Many families prayed before bed, seeking protection through the night. Some repeated short verses when embers stirred, children coughed, or the wind howled. Tonight, you hear these murmured verses drifting softly over the straw. The Latin words are broken, sometimes misremembered, but their meaning remains. Church manuals and folk records show that bedtime prayers were common across Europe. Parents taught children verses like the Creed, sometimes shortened into rhymes. A mother might trace the sign of the cross on each forehead before sleep. You see her now, her hand rough but gentle, moving from child to child in the smoky darkness. A curious 15th-century English account describes a peasant family reciting the Lord's Prayer backward, believing it trapped demons at the threshold. The priest condemned it as superstition, but the family swore it kept them safe. You chuckle softly. Often faith blurred into folk magic, the boundary invisible in the night. Scholars debate how deeply peasants understood the prayers. Some say they mumbled rote words without comprehension. Others argue they were heartfelt, shaping a worldview where the divine touched every part of life. Here, among whispers, the prayers feel significant, if only as a rhythm to steady anxious minds. The old man's voice rises above the others, cracked but strong. He chants a psalm fragment, likely recalled from a church service decades earlier. The words tumble out imperfectly, but the cadence soothes. Children listen, eyes wide, then slowly close as sleep claims them. It feels less like performance, more like a lullaby. You think of monasteries, where chants echoed in stone halls at midnight. Peasants mirror that rhythm, not with polished voices, but with simple murmurs. Faith shaped both worlds, formal in cloisters, improvised in cottages. A small detail in folk custom, some households sprinkled holy water on straw before bed, convinced it repelled sickness and spirits. Whether it worked or not, it sanctified the smoky mess. You imagine the faint splash, the straw darkening briefly, the family sighing with relief. Prayers fade into silence, yet the effect lingers. The room feels less fearful, less burdened. Even the goat seems calmer, settling its head with a soft grunt. Belief, however inaccurate, had power to soften nights dominated by fear and discomfort. Experts debate whether prayer gave peasants a sense of control or reinforced their helplessness. Some say invoking saints offered agency, others argue it highlighted dependence on forces beyond them. As you drift toward sleep, you suspect both are true. Prayer offered structure, but also surrender. Nestling into the straw, the words echo faintly, mingling with the crackle of embers and quiet breathing. Imperfect, often misunderstood, but steady. And steadiness is precious in a world of constant uncertainty. Perhaps peasants clung to prayer at night not to banish cold or hunger, but to give shape to fear. Between snores and sighs, faith whispered reassurance. Eyes closed, you drift into the rhythm of murmur and silence. Despite smoke, fleas, and drafts, the medieval night was never empty. It was filled with words rising to heaven, fragile yet strong enough to carry families through darkness. Almost asleep, a sharp noise cuts through the night, a loud thud at the door. Everyone stirs. Children gasp. The goat bleats. The pig shuffles nervously. For a moment, only wind slips through cracks. Then another knock, firmer, closer, testing the latch. Fear prickles. One thin wooden bar, one flimsy plank separates the family from whatever prowls outside. Medieval cottages were not fortresses. Theft, though less romanticized than raids, was a constant worry. Court records show countless fines for stolen pigs, chickens, or sacks of grain. Winter sharpened desperation, and thieves often prowled at night. Tonight, you hear it for yourself. The father rises, grabbing the only weapon, a wooden staff near the hearth. His eyes flick to those huddled in straw, suspicion evident. Are they guests, or could they have allies outside? Trust is fragile in the dark. He signals silence and creeps to the door. A 14th-century memorial record describes villagers setting traps outside cottages, hidden pits, noisy boards, brush-covered holes. Such measures may have worked, but reveal the constant anxiety of peasants with so little yet so much to lose. One stolen pig could mean famine. Another knock comes, louder. The mother hushes the children, whispering a prayer. The old man mutters about wolves, though the sound is clearly human. Wolves scratch, but they don't knock. You hold your breath as the father shouts, demanding to know who stands outside. No answer, only the retreating shuffle of feet in snow. Historians still debate how common rural theft truly was. Some historians argue theft was widespread, driven by poverty and scarcity. Others suggest local courts exaggerated the problem to justify fines and assert control. Likely, the reality varied. Some villages faced frequent raids, others almost none. But when you live in a single-room hut with one latch protecting all your belongings, anxiety is unavoidable. Inside, the tension lingers. The father replaces the bar, then sits awake by the hearth, staff across his knees. His silhouette glows faintly in the ember light, a silent guard against the night. The rest of the family shifts uneasily but eventually succumbs to exhaustion. They return to fitful sleep. You lie awake longer, heart racing, realizing that even in bed, rest never feels entirely safe. One unusual superstition suggested that placing a broom across the threshold at night would confuse spirits or thieves, forcing them to count each straw before entering. It wasn't a practical defense, yet it illustrates villagers' creativity in guarding against unseen threats. Perhaps this family keeps a broom by the door, part of tonight's makeshift security. The goat eventually relaxes, resting its head on your legs. The pig curls back into straw. The children stop whimpering. Only the father remains alert, staring into the dark. You sense how exhausting such vigilance must have been, night after night. Scholars debate whether fear of theft caused peasants to sleep poorly, or if over time they simply accepted it as routine. Some argue anxiety gnawed at them constantly. Others believe daily life dulled the edge of worry. Likely both are true. Fear sharp at times like this, dull the rest of the year. You exhale into the smoky air, pulling the blanket closer, and finally drift toward sleep. The father's watchful figure still looms by the hearth, a fragile barrier against hunger-driven strangers. Perhaps this was the essence of medieval sleep, never fully secure, never fully peaceful. The body rests, but the mind remains alert to knocks in the night. The hut is quiet, but your thoughts churn. One question repeats: how did peasants endure? How did they survive night after night under such conditions? Thin walls, fleas, drafts, sickness, hunger, strangers at the door. You try to piece it together, realizing scholars have wrestled with the same question for generations. Archaeologists uncover soot-blackened timbers, scraps of wool, livestock bones, yet the picture is incomplete. Some researchers argue peasants developed mental and physical resilience that modern bodies could scarcely imagine. Others contend suffering was relentless, winters endured rather than mastered. Evidence, sparse as it is, cannot provide a single answer. Tonight, lying in the smoky dark, the puzzle feels immediate. One fact stands out: mortality was high. Burial records from English villages show spikes in January and February, with children and the elderly most vulnerable. Some historians see this as proof winter was a yearly crisis, not a minor inconvenience. Others argue records reflect only the worst years, with many families muddling through most winters. The debate remains unresolved. You think of the hut, patched blankets, goats pressed close, whispered prayers. Each strategy offers some comfort, but none eliminates the cold. Survival wasn't about conquering the night, but layering small defenses: cloth against drafts, herbs against fleas, charms against fear. No single measure saved them, but combined, they made life bearable. A 14th-century account describes a Flanders village where families moved into barns with animals during the harshest winter months, abandoning their homes. Whether exaggerated or true, it shows how far people went to escape the cold. Looking at the pig beside you, it seems less absurd. Even so, the toll on the body was relentless. Chronic joint pain, frostbitten fingers, and lung damage from smoke appear in contemporary medical writings. You scratch your arm, imagining the aching bones of peasants who never knew a truly warm night. Modern comforts, central heating, soft beds, sealed windows, make their endurance seem impossible. Yet they lived, worked, raised children, and filled villages with life. Experts remain divided on whether peasants accepted their lot or constantly longed for better circumstances. Some argue folklore filled with feasts and warm halls shows longing. Others emphasize jokes and songs mocking nobles, showing humor and resilience amid misery. Likely both were true: envy tempered by laughter, despair softened by community. You turn in the straw, condensation dripping from rafters, considering another angle. Perhaps the question isn't how they endured, but why. The answer is simple: they had no choice. Endurance wasn't a virtue but a necessity. Winter demanded submission. Those who bent, rather than broke, survived. Yet there is dignity in that survival. You see it in the mother soothing her coughing child, the father keeping vigil with his staff, the old man muttering prayers through chattering teeth. They didn't conquer the cold but refused to let it conquer them entirely. That refusal, repeated nightly, was a form of strength. One Scandinavian superstition claimed those who laughed at the cold would feel it less. You smile at the thought of peasants joking in the dark, mocking their misery. Perhaps humor was as crucial a defense as straw and wool. The fire flares as an ember catches, casting shadows across the wall. You notice how fragile the whole system is, reliant on a dozen improvised tricks. None perfect, all necessary. Scholars may never agree on whether peasants adapted or suffered endlessly. Inside this hut, both truths coexist. They suffered, yes, but they also adapted because there was no alternative. You close your eyes again, reflecting on that paradox. Survival was neither triumph nor failure, it was the stubborn in-between. Peasants' legacy is not conquering winter, but outlasting it. One cough, one prayer, one ember, one shiver at a time. The night continues, and the smoky hush presses in. Your body aches from straw lumps, from fellow sleepers' elbows and knees, from the lingering chill. Yet a quieter thought emerges. Not every winter night was miserable. Some carried laughter, stories, even tenderness. To understand survival, you must imagine those softer hours when community was the blanket. When the fire burned brighter and bellies were fuller after a feast, families lingered awake, telling stories. Folklorists believe many fairy tales originated in huts like this, whispered while children slept against their parents. Tonight, the old man's voice rises, recounting a fox tricking a farmer. Children giggle, half asleep. Stories were entertainment but also lessons, warnings against greed, encouragement of cleverness, reminders of saints' miracles. French sources note riddles were a common pastime by the hearth. What runs but never moves? What has a mouth but does not speak? Such games filled the dark with more than fear. You imagine peasants puzzling over them, momentarily forgetting fleas. Scholars debate their significance. Some see them as rare reprieves, others as central to community cohesion. Archaeology cannot answer, but inside the hut, you sense the power of words to ease even the coldest night. Songs, too, belonged here. A mother hums a tune, cracked but soothing, perhaps a local lullaby passed down through generations. The child against your side sighs and nestles closer. Music needed only breath. A fragment of melody could outlast hunger, carrying hope. A 15th-century chronicle recounts a visiting lord, surprised to find peasants laughing and singing late at night despite poverty. He chastised them for idleness, yet they replied, "If we cannot laugh, we will die faster." That answer lingers. It reveals that laughter was survival itself. Around the hearth, strangers stir and share their own story. A journey delayed by snow, a farmer who offered shelter the night before. Their voices join the room's chorus, weaving outsiders into the fabric of family life. Suspicion softens into fellowship, at least for tonight. Winter had blurred the boundary between household and community. Nights were rarely private. They became opportunities for connection. Even small acts mattered. A piece of bread shared among children, a coal lent to a neighbor, a whispered joke into the straw. Each was a tool against despair. Scholars debate whether peasants viewed these acts as charity or simple routine, yet either way, survival became communal. Alone, a family might fail. Together, they had a chance. The old man finishes his fox story, and silence returns, warmer this time, tinged with faint smiles. You lie back, recognizing that these quieter moments may never appear in court records or church logs, yet they were as real as hunger or frost. They were the glue holding human spirit together when the body suffered. The fire crackles weakly, but the true warmth comes from another source, the hum of voices, the bond of shared struggle. It seeps into you, gentler than wool, stronger than straw. Perhaps this is what historians often miss when counting deaths and famines. Peasant resilience was not only physical but emotional. They endured not just through rags and goats, but through stories, songs, and laughter. These invisible comforts left no archaeological trace, yet without them, survival would have been impossible. You sigh, letting the memory of the tale wrap around you like an extra blanket. Your eyes close, and you think, perhaps the real warmth of a medieval winter night came not from fire, animals, or patched blankets, but from the voices reminding you that you were not alone. The night stretches toward its end. You sense it in the stillness of the hut, in the way even the pig has stopped shifting, in the pale light where snow reflects at the window. After so many drafts, coughs, knocks, and prayers, a lull arrives. It is not complete silence, but a gentler rhythm of breath. You lie in the straw, reflecting on how these fragments combine to form the fabric of peasant sleep. Every detail, the patched blankets, smoky embers, goats pressed close, whispered prayers, contributes to the story of endurance. Surviving a medieval winter night was never about a single solution. It was about stacking defenses, fur over wool, body against body, prayer layered over fear. The hut itself was a quilt stitched from necessity. One surviving 15th-century English inventory lists a household's bedding as a single sheet, one blanket, and one coverlet. Stretching those across 6 or 7 people seems miraculous, not that they were cold, but that they survived at all. A curious anecdote appears in a village chronicle. A woman remembered that her family judged mornings by whether frost had formed on their eyebrows during sleep. If not, the night was warm. You smile at this dark humor. Tonight, you almost feel frost glittering on your own lashes. Scholars remain divided on how peasants perceived these conditions. Did they see them as hardship or just life? Some claim constant complaints, others argue acceptance of the cold as inevitable. Yet, as you watch the family stir, you sense resignation mixed with resilience. They cursed the cold, yet they rose, tended fires, and patched blankets. The father sits first, stoking the hearth back to life. Embers crackle, smoky light fills the room, and children blink awake. The mother pulls on her cloak, fingers stiff with cold. The old man coughs and stretches, joints snapping like dry twigs. Even the travelers move, brushing frost from their cloaks. Another night survived, another dawn earned. Folk accounts mention a small morning ritual, thanking the fire as if it were a companion. The father pauses, hand hovering above the flame, lips moving. Prayer or gratitude, it carries the same meaning, a quiet acknowledgement that survival is never guaranteed. The hut hums with the sounds of morning, children yawning, animals snuffling, water poured from a frozen jug. The night's terrors fade, yet remain remembered. Winter will demand the same struggle tonight and the next, until spring eases its grip. Lying in the straw, you realize a deeper truth. Peasants survived winter nights not by seeking comfort, but by accepting discomfort as constant, finding small joys in song, story, faith, and one another's warmth. Sleep was not an escape, it was part of survival. Perhaps that explains why so many medieval prayers asked simply for a good night's rest, not endless comfort, but the chance to wake at dawn. As light seeps through the patched window, you understand the modesty of that wish. To live through the night was victory itself. The story softens now. The sharp edges of cold and hunger give way to reflection. Picture the hut one last time. Smoke rising lazily, blankets patched but clutched tightly, children curling against parents, animals sighing in straw. The long night has passed. Discomfort remains, but the family endured. Let your breathing slow alongside theirs, steady and calm. Imagine the revived fire crackling softly, constant like a whisper promising warmth. Outside, snow lies thick, but inside, human persistence keeps life alive. The night was long, yet dawn has arrived. Consider the small victories hidden in each detail. A scrap of cloth turned into a canopy, a goat lending heat to a child, a whispered prayer soothing fear. Alone, none erase hardship. Together, they create survival. That was the rhythm of medieval winters. Never comfort, but always endurance. Let this settle in your mind. People before you faced colder, darker nights, yet still found ways to laugh, dream, and sing. Their resilience is a living reminder. The human spirit bends, but does not break. As you drift further into rest, imagine the hut quieting, embers glowing, breath rising in the dim air. You are part of that rhythm, lying among them, safe for now. The world outside can wait. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. The long night is over. Sweet dreams.